What is going on, YouTube universe? Welcome to the Hip and Shoulder, but more importantly, welcome to another edition of the Round Recap, where we sit down and unpack another week of AFL action, and round 15 continued to be the growing trend of what we have seen over the past couple of weeks. Although be it over the bye rounds and some teams performing some weeks and some teams underperforming the next and creating conversation points or whether or not the buys actually do help teams or whether they hamper teams, we are continuing to see the boys separated from the men. The true contenders are starting to stand tall. There is still a handful of teams that are throwing up question marks in the middle of the pack and are kind of in limbo to where they're going to fall when it comes to season's end. But alas, it is time, ladies and gentlemen, and it all kicked off on Thursday night with a dark horse contender rising to the occasion once more. It was Fremantle hosting Essendon at Optus Stadium. Now, I firmly believe I will die on any mountain in saying so. I have said it many times throughout the course of this season. Fremantle on paper have one of the most comprehensive lists that are built within the competition. Forward line, midfield, defence, we have star power everywhere. Luke Jackson really needs to just be left alone as the number one ruckman. I feel Sean Darcy will get traded at the end of the year. They need to lock down on keeping Jackson at Fremantle. He is the man to take them forward. The fact that he can get as many hitouts as he does and he can still kick 2 or 3 goals and have impact at ground level, essentially after the ruck contest, becoming a clearance machine, is absolutely unreal. And if they let him go back to Victoria, whether it's to play for Melbourne again or elsewhere, I feel they have fumbled severely. But up until this point in time, without talking about Luke Jackson, I just wanted to get that out of the way because I just think Fremantle's hopes moving forward hinges on this man playing as well as he did. Their consistency for the earlier portion of the year had wavered. It had gone backwards and forwards. We have seen their best, we have seen their worst, and the gap in between was too substantial sometimes. But we're starting to see continuity creep into their game. They're stringing some wins together, albeit, whether or not it's against teams that are going to be competing for the premiership or teams that are underneath them. They're being dealt the cards that they're being dealt, and they're making sure that they smack it for a home run each and every time. And they comprehensively defeated Essendon in this game. I did say it was only going to be 20, I think I said 27 points, something around that realm. But this was a game that ended up becoming a bit of a percentage booster for them, and deservingly so. They just put pedal to the metal and did not let up from the first bounce. And this is a game where percentage, come the end of the year, is going to come into play for a team like Fremantle, because they're in that pack of, 6th place, probably to about 10th or 11th place, that are currently, going to be competing for those top 8 spots. And I think percentage is going to separate a lot of those teams within that marker on the fixturing. They look so good. They look so well drilled. It's just a game, unfortunately, where Essendon's injuries are just starting to mount up. And it didn't help them with the fact that Dersma went down with a hamstring injury, and he's been providing a lot of outside run on the wing for them. So, whether or not we're going to see more debutants, whether or not there's some players waiting in the wings to come back in. Zach Merritt's been getting thrown around and played forward line, back line, all positions but the position he should be playing, which is in the midfield. I feel the drop-off for Essendon is going to be too unsurmountable because these injuries are going to take their toll. When you have a look at the players that are potentially missing from this lineup, it just really rings true to gaps not being able to be filled. And, when you're missing the likes of Mason Redman out of defence, you don't have any Ben Mackay, you don't have Kyle Langford forward of the ball, you're still missing some key components everywhere else. I mean, Dersma, as I said, went and did a hamstring injury. They don't have Sam Draper, so they had young Vigo Vicente debut, and I thought he played incredibly well against Luke Jackson, but Luke Jackson absolutely dominated. And, you need to take advantage of this. As unfortunate as injuries are, if you're coming up against a team that is hampered by injury, you need to make sure that you put them to the sword, and Fremantle did that rather easily in the end. I mean, we look at the score breakdown of the game, and it was a contest at quarter time, but after that, it was just all the way of Fremantle. At quarter time, it was Fremantle leading 3-2-20 to 2-2-14. Just a single kick in at anybody's game, but at halftime, it became 9-3-57, leading 6-5-41. After that, as much as Essendon tried to stay in the game for gaps, and they probably did about halfway through the third quarter, but then Fremantle just went to another gear. They ended the third quarter 13-3-81, leading 6-8-44, and then the final scoreline 16-8-104, defeating Essendon 9-9-63. Essendon only found avenue to kick 3 goals for the entire second half, whereas Fremantle went on to kick themselves 7 goals 5. They could have won this by a bit of a bigger margin, which would have helped their percentage a lot more, but again, they took opportunity where it came knocking, and they beat Essendon quite convincingly around the ground when it came to disposal, when it came to clearance. They had 30-odd more disposals total. They kicked the ball a hell of a lot more. Essendon did win the handball game. Disposal efficiency was pretty good by both teams. The free kick count, don't think it was too lopsided, 23-16 the way of Fremantle. But this is where Fremantle's dominance crept in. The hitouts, 53-24 Fremantle's way. Clearances, 44-26 Fremantle's way. Centre clearances, 17-8 Fremantle's way. Stoppage clearances, 27-18 Fremantle's way. Contested possessions, they won. They won the uncontested possession. They turned the ball over less. They marked the ball more. They had less marks inside 50. 6 marks to 13, and Essendon had some good looks, but they just failed to register those scores. As I said, 16-8 playing the 9 goals 9 in the end just wasn't good enough from Essendon to get the job done. They tackled and applied pressure where it counted, but outside of that, Fremantle just absolutely dominated every single stat line. And again, I think it's because Essendon have been pigeonholed into this kind of section here where they've had to play young kids earlier than expected due to injury. And we've seen other teams do this in the past. We've seen West Coast hampered with injury. They had to blood a lot of young kids. We've seen Richmond do the same. And even this year, during this rebuild, we've blooded a lot of Tiger Cubs. And I feel in the long run, while it's hurting Essendon now, this is going to hold them in good stead moving forward. I've said this a couple of times already, but when these players have got, 50 games under their belt and they're getting a feel for the game and they know how the systems work, they're going to be all the better for it. And getting this early exposure is only going to propel them forward a little bit sooner than what some may expected, which is only going to help Essendon in the long run and help these players out in the long run. That being said, this win, 41 points, it was all Fremantle players taking the votes from myself this week for the 2025 Hip and Shoulder MVP Award. If you are unfamiliar with how this process works, it's exactly like the Brownlow. 3-2-1, best on ground gets 3, then 2, then 1. And if there are players that are stiffed to have missed those votes, we still have Team of the Week that I've introduced as well that allows some players to creep in and get recognition in that way. Players aren't going to ever know this is going on. I'm not expecting, somebody to sit down that plays AFL and go, oh, this guy's giving me some vote. They don't give a shit, okay? It's about me and being able to express my love for the game, my passion for the game, and creating discussion and conversation points with myself and you guys at home, because naturally this is a biased, voting system because it's going off of my personal opinion, which is always going to be different to yours. So if you agree, if you disagree, let's discuss about it in the comment section down below. But the one vote for this game I gave to Jordan Clark. I thought off half-back he was sensational. I feel he should be well within All-Australian calculations off of half-back this year. He had 33 disposals comprised of 23 kicks and 10 handballs, 8 marks, 5 tackles, 595 metres gained, and had the 3 score involvements. The 2 vote, I originally had this guy for 3, but then I realised just how impactful that the 3 voter was. So I've moved him to 2 votes, and it's Mr. Caleb Sarong. 35 disposals, 24 kicks and 11 handballs, 5 marks, 4 tackles, 7 clearances, 783 metres gained, 2 goals, and 6 score involvements. I feel this is another player who is in All-Australian contention this year, and he could be a smoky for the Brownlow as well. But the 3 vote, after much consideration, he had an absolute pearler of a game. We've already highlighted him once in the video already. I've given it to Luke Jackson. 21 disposals, 11 kicks, 10 handballs, 4 marks, 4 tackles, 48 hitouts, 10 clearances, 231 metres gained, 3 goals, and 12 score involvements. It was one of the best, if not the best, performances as a Docker that I have seen him put into practice. And if he can start playing this comprehensively moving forward, this could be the key component that propels Fremantle deeper into September. I definitely feel when it comes to finals, these guys are the dark horses because people are kind of writing them off because of their inconsistencies this year. But if it clicks and everything falls into place, these guys could do some damage. Friday night, we shift on over to the GMHBA Stadium, Geelong hosting Brisbane. I said I thought this was going to be match of the round given the circumstances of where these teams were at. And it ended up being a whitewash, which is kind of ironic considering the Geelong supporters thought they'd rock up wearing white and make a big scene, but they ended up with egg on their faces because it was Brisbane by 41 points, if you don't mind, which speaks volumes to their mindset. They could have easily just fallen off the cliff here 2 weeks prior in a row back-to-back. That inconsistency in front of goal has cost them wins, but they came out and absolutely towed up one of the premiership favourites, and I feel this propels them back into premiership conversation yet again. I felt over the last recent weeks they kind of dropped off that marker a little bit, but I think leapfrogging Geelong here, they very well are back in contention again because they've proven once more that their best can beat arguably the best this year. Geelong and Collingwood have been the standard, and Brisbane made them look second rate. It was a game that blew my mind because at not one point in this game did I ever feel Geelong were ever going to come back at all. At quarter time, Brisbane led 4-2-26 to 1-3-9. That shifted at halftime to 7-4-46, leading Geelong's 3-5-23. Now, okay, 23 points, 4 goals gets them back in front, and we've seen players like Stengel, like Jeremy Cameron, turn the heat up when the time comes, so I didn't write Geelong out at half-time. But Brisbane, coming out in that third term, just absolutely made sure that there was no catching. 11-6-72, leading 5-10-40, and the final scoreline, 14-8-92, defeating Geelong's 6-15-51. This was a flip of the script because it was Geelong ultimately that had their inaccuracies cost them a game here, because after half-time, Brisbane went on to kick 7 goals 4 against Geelong kicking 3 goals 10. It's not a Geelong outfit that we're used to seeing perform this way. It was very dysfunctional. It was very ragtag. It was hard to behold to some, especially given the fact that, again, Lachie Neale was kept to a very low standard in this game, but it was the likes of Jared Berry, Josh Dunkley, Hugh McCluggage. These players were able to stand tall. Dane Zorko, I thought, was close to best on ground, if not was best on ground, launching off of half-back. Logan Morris, back-to-back weeks, bags of 5. He's really starting to come into his own. Brisbane are a serious threat, and I feel, again, people were disregarding them a little bit because of their 2 losses in recent weeks, but I think they've re-established themselves here quite convincingly. The stats for the overall game, they dominated the disposal by 64. They had 33 more kicks. They had 31 more handballs. They had only 7 more inside 50s, but won by 41 points. That's insane. Disposal efficiency was way down by Geelong. Efficiency inside 50, Geelong were actually better than Brisbane. Hitouts was close, clearances was close, so the midfield battle was absolutely intense because it could have gone either way. It was a coin flip, but it was after those clearances where Brisbane found ascendancy around the ground. It was just very, very, very well done. As we did last week, I'm going to turn attention to player stats. I'm going to call out those who were a little bit wayward in front of goal and could have maybe changed Geelong's fortunes around just a little bit. We had the milestone man, 350, Patrick Dangerfield. He kicked 3 behinds. Shannon Neal kicked 1 goal, 2. Jack Martin kicked 2 behinds. Stengel only kicked 1 behind for the game. Bailey Smith kicked 1 behind for the game. Brian Myers kicked 1 goal, 1. Oliver Dempsey only kicked the 1 behind. It was, players like Neal, Dangerfield, Stengel, Brian Myers, these are players we're used to seeing hit the scoreboard. Patrick Dangerfield made a meal of the 3 behinds he kicked because he could have easily kicked 2 of those quite comfortably. Am I concerned as a neutral supporter? No. If you're a Geelong supporter, should you be concerned? No, I don't think so, because I feel losses like this are good to get at this point of time in the season. You don't want to be losing late and dropping momentum, and you don't want to be losing, especially coming into that finals transition from the back end of the home and away season and then into finals. It's going to be an interesting watch because Geelong do have the softest run home comparatively to any other team in the competition. So again, losing this, I think, it's the perfect time for them to hit reset and reassess, and they're going to bounce back in a big way in their next outing. I can guarantee whoever they come up against next, they're going to rue it, because Geelong are going to come out firing. But Brisbane getting the job done, 41 points, and they take the 3, 2, and 1 votes collectively for this game. I gave the 1 vote to Logan Morris. I thought he is really starting to blossom into something here. People are talking about the loss of Joe Danaher. People are talking up other young key forwards in the competition like Aaron Cadman and, Nate Caddy. I feel Logan Morris could well and truly be ahead of both of those players, and I feel he could have the bigger career because he's already establishing himself within a premiership contending team and dominating in the forward half. It was an absolutely insane performance by him. 13 disposals, 9 kicks, 4 handballs, 8 marks, 4 tackles, 169 metres gained, 5 goals, and he had the 8 score involvements. The 2 vote I've given to Josh Dunkley. He had 30 disposals, 11 kicks, 19 handballs, 4 marks, 10 tackles, 4 clearances, 198 metres gained, and had the 8 score involvements. And best on ground, I thought Dane Zorko's work off of halfback was absolutely sensational. He had 33 disposals, 26 kicks, 7 handballs, 7 marks, 3 tackles, 798 metres gained, and 7 score involvements. I still feel Geelong Collingwood is going to be the more likely outcome for the grand final this year. But with Brisbane beating Geelong like they did here, this is going to give them all the momentum and confidence that they need moving forward to kind of push one of those teams out of the way. Could we see Collingwood versus Brisbane this year? Remains to be seen, but let's see if Brisbane can keep this on track, because if they have truly turned their fortunes around, could spell doom for the rest of the competition. The first on Saturday to many saw an upset at the MCG. It was Carlton hosting North Melbourne, and North Melbourne getting the chocolates here. And I'm so glad, because I actually tipped North Melbourne for the upset this week, so that makes me incredibly happy. The conversation point I had when I tipped North Melbourne was around forward half of the ball. And with the loss of Harry Mackay due to injury and whether or not he'll come back, whether he gets surgery and it sees him out for the rest of the year, I think that is going to be severely detrimental to Carlton long term. And it follows up with the conversation point of whether or not Carlton look to trade one of Harry Mackay or Charlie Curnow. Now, if they're going to trade one, I think Harry Mackay is probably the likely suitor to be traded, but I don't think they can afford to do so, because they have proven here the week prior against West Coast, Carlton only went on to kick 2 goals, I believe, in the second half, and that was after Charlie Curnow was subbed out of the game and no Harry Mackay forward of the ball. So they lacked any forward presence. Similar circumstances here. Charlie Curnow played a full game. I don't think he kicked a goal. If he did, he only kicked 1. I'm going to do a quick live check right here just to make sure. I don't think he kicked 1. I could be wrong. No, he didn't kick 1 at all. And that is just a huge rap to Toby Pink, shutting him down for a full game like that. That is absolutely insane. But they lacked that forward kind of pressure 2 weeks ago against West Coast. They were just lucky that Mitch McGovern stood up to kick 4 goals in this game. Otherwise, it would have been a bigger blowout and should have been a bigger blowout. I mean, to come within 11, I don't know whether that is accredited to Carlton being given a little bit more respect out of this, or whether or not North Melbourne's youngsters just ran out of gas and kind of took their foot off the pedal a little bit. I don't know where we kind of sit with that. Considering the scoreline will show you how convincingly North Melbourne were ahead in this game. At quarter time, it was Carlton leading 2 goals 6-18 to 139, but at half time, it was Carlton 2 goals 7, only kicking the one behind for the quarter, playing against North Melbourne 7-5-47. It then shifted out to 13-6-84, leading Carlton's 5-8-38. And then at the end of the game, 13-6-84, leading 10-13-73. Now, what was alarming the most is obviously North Melbourne did not score at all in the last term. Carlton went on to kick 5 goals 5. This could have been one of the best comebacks that Carlton have mounted in a very long time. It would have been absolutely demoralising for North, but I'm glad North won it because they finally get reward for effort. Some of these young kids have been busting their fucking guts this year for North Melbourne, and as a neutral supporter, I think North Melbourne winning here was the better outcome. I feel they played the better brand for 3.5 quarters. They played a really good contested brand in the first term. That drop-off in the last was a bit lacking, but again, all these young kids are going to be better off for, you know, experiencing games like this, because they went into a mode where they tried to shut the game down. They were comprehensive, I feel, in doing so. If there was probably 2 minutes left on the clock, I think Carlton opened up the door to actually win this game. But North Melbourne were vastly impressive. I was very impressed, and it surprisingly came with some players for North Melbourne underperforming a little bit. I mean, Tristan Cherry, I feel, is the number one all-Australian ruckman rather this year, and he had a very down game. Didn't have the impact we're used to seeing him have. Little bits and pieces around the ground from players like Jack Darling, like Luke Parker, Caleb Daniel. Nick Larkey didn't have much of an influence on the game, which was quite surprising. I thought maybe he would have gotten a bit of a wrangle on Jacob Wiedering, especially given Jacob Wiedering had an injury scare earlier in the game. But when we look at the stats, Carlton led actually most of them. I mean, they had 14 more inside 50s. They lose by 11 points. Don't understand how that happens. Disposal efficiency kind of on par. They had more disposals. They had more kicks. They won the hitouts by 10. They had more centre clearances. They had more contested possession. They won the uncontested possession. They turned the ball over less. They had more marks around the ground. They had more marks inside 50. And laid more tackles for the game, especially tackles inside 50. But it was just North Melbourne making opportunity when it came knocking. And that's what you've got to do with young teams like North Melbourne. You know, back against the wall, not many people giving you a chance. Just throw everything you've got on it. Well, what do you have to lose? In the end, they pick up one of their better scalps of the season, and it's unfortunate for me as a Richmond man, because I'd love to see North Melbourne struggle a little bit more, because we've got their number one pick coming our way in the draft this year. So currently we're looking at pick 3 out of them. I'm hoping they don't kind of win a couple more. If they could slow the fuck down and slow their roll a little bit, that'd be fantastic. Couple of players stiff here for the votes, because I have landed the way of 3 North Melbourne players. Mitch McGovern and George Hewitt, both very stiff to miss here. I am going to feature them in my team of the week, because I think their roles and where they played on the ground was better than some for the duration of the weekend. But just for this game in particular, I think the 3 players I'm going to highlight here are the 3 that really stood up when they were required, stood up in the big moments. The 1 vote I gave to Colby McKercher. He had 29 disposals, 20 kicks and 9 handballs, 1 mark, 3 tackles, 2 clearances, 636 metres gained, 2 goals, and 3 score involvements. He's really starting to grow into something, Colby. I don't know whether he's a wingman, is he a half-back? I don't know, but the role he is playing suits him incredibly well. The 2 vote I landed on Harry Sheasel. Hasn't lit the world on fire like he did last year, but he still finds a way to contribute, and he was one of the better contributors on the day. He had 30 disposals, 16 kicks and 14 handballs, 9 marks, 3 tackles, 1 clearance, 390 metres gained, 1 goal, and 5 score involvements. And best on ground, he had a game where he played out of his skin earlier in the year, and it took North Melbourne a long way to beating Melbourne in that game. And I feel this guy in the contest was absolutely huge all day. Wouldn't be surprised if he picked up the 3 Brownlow votes as well. But I landed with Tom Powell. He had 34 disposals, 16 kicks, 18 handballs, 3 marks, 5 tackles, 8 clearances, 614 metres gained, and 5 score involvements. Teams like North Melbourne are going to be very, very, very optimistic coming into the back end of the year that they could cause upsets to teams that are going to be playing finals. And they, again, as I said, have nothing to lose. They're not going to play finals this year. But when you're in a position where you know you're not going to play finals, but you throw everything at every single game as if it was a final, that is what North are doing. This is what they're going to continue to do for the rest of the year, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw them picked up another win or 2 before the end of the season. Carlton, however, I don't think they're in finals calculations. I don't see it. I know they've got a favourable run home, but I just feel they're so off the mark, it is not funny. Patrick Cripps last year smashes the Brownlow count, and I think that is still a rort. I feel he did not have that big of a year, and he's a shadow of his former self. He's just completely dropped off the face of the earth. No Sam Walsh, no Nick Newman. They are missing components, I understand that. No Harry Mackay, but I think that goes to show that, you know, this team isn't too kind of focused on, I don't know, it's just, it's so hard. It's so hard to work out where this drop-off has come from, because they've in the past been able to operate without Harry Mackay. They've been able to operate without Sam Walsh. Nick Newman in and out. So I don't know whether we can make excuses for injuries being the case here, because they might have had those players out, but they still comprehensively had a better team out on the deck than what North Melbourne were offering, and yet North Melbourne got the job done. Lance Franklin has posed the question as to whether or not Carlton needs to sever ties with Michael Voss. Now, Michael Voss failed as a coach at Brisbane. He was 4th in line for the role at Collingwood, which ended up going to Craig McRae, and he's now having similar things happen at Carlton that we saw at Brisbane. I don't think Voss is the man. I really do not. I think Carlton need a shake-up from the top up, and it's rather alarming because I believe the CEO that's coming in for Carlton is the same guy that had Michael Voss 4th in the pecking line at Collingwood. So, interesting watch. Let's keep an eye on that. But North Melbourne, very impressive this past weekend. Moving on over to Adelaide Oval, we had Port Adelaide hosting Sydney. This was a game that I honestly thought, after seeing Port Adelaide get to work the week prior, that coming off of the bye, Sydney were going to struggle. And that was not the case, because Sydney gave Port Adelaide a little bit of a touch-up. 19 points the way of the Swans, and had I known the players that were returning were going to be returning when I did my tipping and everything else, I probably would have backed Sydney, because these are players that we have been talking about all year as being the key components to the Sydney machine that they have been missing. And now that they've come back into circulation, Sydney looked very impressive. I mean, they kicked 9 goals, 17. This could have been an absolute bloodbath. Unfortunately, it was not, and Port Adelaide should count themselves lucky. But this game was, even in the clenches of, you know, the first term, and the first term was very low scoring, I felt Sydney still had all the momentum shifting their way. Quarter time, they led 1-6-12 to 2 behinds 2. 10 points, I know. But even then, Sydney had ascendancy all around the ground. They just couldn't find a way to hit the scoreboard. At half-time, it was Sydney 4 goals, 10-34, leading 2-4-16. They were very wasteful in that first term. They should have converted, I feel, at least 5 of those behinds. We'll talk about the culprits very shortly, but the second half, it was just a absolute dominant performance. Even though in the third term, Port Adelaide were the one that did all the scoring, it still looked the way of Sydney. I mean, Sydney went from 4-10 to 5-16. They only kicked the 1 goal 6 for the game, but Port Adelaide's 4 goals 6, so they kicked what? They kicked 2 goals 2 to 1 goal 6. They still were having all these shots on goal. They were still finding ways to score. They were just very inaccurate. It is very much the case of what we have seen with Brisbane. Could this be a trend where inaccuracy is going to cost a team like Sydney playing finals this year, especially now on the rebound. Who knows? Final score was 9-17-71, defeating Port Adelaide 7-10-52. Both teams incredibly wasteful. A game where inaccuracy cost Port Adelaide the win. Inaccuracy saved Port Adelaide from being absolutely embarrassed. We will turn attention now to the individuals who decided they were going to be a little bit wasteful. Joel Amati kicked 6 behinds for the game. Some of those he should have converted. I feel he should have easily kicked 4 of those goals that he had missed. Chad Warner kicked 2 behinds. Angus Sheldrick kicked 2 behinds. Papley on return only kicked 2 behinds. It's going to turn around. It's going to turn around. But I mean, Joel Amati and Tom Papley, these are players you need to be scoring consistently if Sydney are going to win games, and they kicked 8 behinds between them, didn't register a goal. A little bit alarming, but I think Dean Cox gets them back to work this week. Joel Amati's only just recently come back into the team. Tom Papley playing his first game for a very long time. We had Errol Goulden come in and play his first game for a very long time. So Sydney are starting to get the players back into circulation that they need. It's just a matter of finding a consistent level of football comprehensively. And again, chemistry and momentum are things that are going to need to be built, because these are players that have been away from the game for so long. Joel Amati in and out due to suspension, due to injury. But around the ground, it was a pretty tight contest. I mean, disposals only just the way of Sydney. Kicks only just the way of Sydney. Handballs only just the way of Port Adelaide. Inside 50s, Sydney absolutely dominated. 35-51 inside 50s. Again, Sydney just made a meal of the opportunities that they had been given. Hit-outs were even. Clearances were pretty even. Uncontested ball was even. The contested ball was won the way of 23 contested possessions to Sydney. Marks around the ground were even. It's just, and yeah, unfortunately Port Adelaide just never led at all. So it was a close game around the ground. It was just a matter of one team taking advantage of opportunity more than the other, and in that being said, taking opportunity but also squandering opportunity as well. Is it going to cost Sydney later in the run? I feel Sydney are more primed here to push for finals than Port Adelaide. I think Port Adelaide have just dropped off the mark rather comprehensively. The 3-2-1 for me out of this game, it fell all the way of Sydney players. We could have potentially looked at a couple of Port Adelaide players here, but I chose not to, because these 3, I think, were absolutely huge in ensuring Sydney got the win here. These 3 were probably the most critical players on the ground. The 1 vote goes to Callum Mills, who I think since coming back has been absolutely sensational. 27 disposals rather, I was getting ahead of myself. 27 disposals, 16 kicks and 11 handballs, 8 marks, 1 tackle, 1 clearance, 565 metres gained, and 8 score involvements. The 2 vote I'm giving to Brodie Grundy. I feel in the ruck he was absolutely brilliant. Obviously coming up against a young kid, you don't expect much, in the way of expectation. You know that Brodie Grundy is going to get the better of a younger kid, but the last few outings that Brodie Grundy has had, he has looked top notch. 22 disposals, 11 kicks, 11 handballs, 8 marks, 4 tackles, 34 hitouts, 6 clearances, 234 metres gained, and 5 score involvements. And best on ground for me was Isaac Heaney. He had 28 disposals, 12 kicks and 16 handballs, 4 marks, 4 tackles, 5 clearances, 303 metres gained, 2 goals, and 6 score involvements. If you are a Port Adelaide supporter, if you are a Sydney supporter, if you barrack for any team, let me know in the comment section down below how you feel about where your team is currently situated, because I feel Sydney and Port Adelaide have been in football limbo for weeks and weeks and weeks. I feel Sydney are now primed, as I said, to get a better launch at it at the back end of the year, because they've got the components they need back. Port Adelaide have had the pieces, albeit they didn't have Zach Butters for the starting portion of the year, but they've had the pieces for majority of the season, and they've just failed to deliver. I don't know where these teams sit with me ultimately when it comes to the end of the year, but Sydney picking up a very solid win, and Port Adelaide just struggling to find ways. This was a little bit of an ugly game to watch, but as a neutral, seeing Sydney win, I'm not against it, because it meant Port Adelaide lost. Saturday night, the final hit out of the day saw Collingwood hosting St Kilda at Marvel Stadium. It is not often we see Collingwood get Marvel Stadium home games, and I did not think that was going to hamper them in the slightest, because I did feel that this was ending up in a one-sided affair, and it very much was the case. It was a game that Collingwood really, I feel, were tested in parts, but they still found a way to just keep momentum on their side, and they were cool, calm, and collected, and that is what is the measure of a great team. They didn't lose their bundle when St Kilda come charging. They found a way to get back in front. They found a way to stem the flow, and they ended up winning the game comfortably in the end with a very late just charge home, just running home away with the game, as we have seen Collingwood do many times before. At quarter time, it was Collingwood 5 goals, 131, leading 3-1-19. Only 2 goals the way of Collingwood, and I thought St Kilda had done really well to stay that close, given the scope of how Collingwood had played in that opening term. At halftime, Collingwood moved on to 8-5-53, leading St Kilda's 6-5-41. Again, only 12 points, 2 goals in it. Could it be a St Kilda comeback in the second half? We started seeing St Kilda come back, and they drew back in very close. But Collingwood put the foot down, and they led at three-quarter time, 12-9-81 to 9-6-60. And then the run home saw Collingwood 16-12-108, defeating St Kilda 11-8-74. It was very, very much so a game that was widely spoken about leading into it, because Marcus Winhager and the conversation around him as a tagger was probably the biggest spoken about thing leading up to this game and this round of football. He had had big scalps. I mean, he kept Marcus Bontempelli to 13 or 14 disposals the week before, which is the first time in, I think they turned around and said something like 5 years, that Bontempelli had that low of a disposal count, that low of an influence. However, I've openly spoken about this on social media, and I'll turn phrase again. He can tag these players all he wants, but if the opposition is still winning the game, is the tag effectful? Effectful? Is that a word? I'm starting to go crazy. I don't even know if effectful is a thing. Effective is probably the word I was talking about. Was it an effective tag, ladies and gentlemen, if you can shut a player down, but the opposition team still wins? And everyone was talking about how he was going to manhandle Nick Dacos, and Nick Dacos was going to get nowhere near the ball. Nick Dacos was close enough to best on ground in this game, and that was with somebody who was tagging him hard. There was a bit of back and forth early in the game that saw some free kicks given away both sides. A lot of unconventional and frowned upon methods. There was a lot of pinching behind play. The deliberate knee into the back of the hamstring, trying to cause corkies and things like that. Not a good look for Marcus Winhager. He did get slapped with a $1,500 fine for a forceful palm to the chest. Nick Dacos milked it. He got a free kick for it. I think they're going to contest that. I'm pretty sure they are contesting that striking charge. It'll probably get thrown out. Open palm into the sternum. It was a push. Wasn't a strike. It probably gets thrown out. But they came in with a game plan to try to shut Nick Dacos down. And Nick Dacos, unfortunately, is a player that sometimes can't be kept down. And even if he does get kept down, he finds a way to get back into the game. We've seen it in other games. We saw the hard tag from Fremantle on Nick Dacos. Gets sent forward, kicks 2 goals. We have seen games where Nick Dacos has been very slow to come off the mark, but then later in the game he absolutely lights up. We saw that against North Melbourne earlier this year, where Nick Dacos just lit it up in the final term when Collingwood needed somebody to stand tall. It's very hard, and I said this about Geelong this week, and Geelong went and lost. But it's very hard to see where Collingwood's next loss is going to come from, because they don't lose their shit when a team is coming at them. They know how to reset, they know how to rebound, and they're just very calm about it all. There's no rush. They're happy to maintain possession, wait for things to happen, get chain football going. It was a great win by them. And it was actually surprising to see that around the ground, St Kilda actually had more of the ball. They won more hit-outs, they had more clearances, they had more stoppage clearances, they had more contested possession. They turned the ball over a little bit more, but only marginally. But it was Collingwood's ability to mark the ball and take the ball away from St Kilda that won this game. I mean, they had 28 more marks, 8 more marks inside 50, 6 more contested around the ground. They laid 19 more tackles for the game. They laid 13 tackles inside 50, when the average for them is only 11, so they were exceeding expectations forward of the ball there. Just very, as I said, very comprehensive win here. Collingwood are the real deal. If you had told anybody leading into this season that Collingwood, after 15 rounds of football, would have only lost 2 games and would be sitting a couple of games clear on top of the ladder, you'd be fucking crazy. They'd be getting you locked up and thrown in the back of a divvy van and being taken away. But it has been the case, and I can't be angry about it. Collingwood have just been incredibly impressive. My best mate is a Collingwood supporter, and I love getting on board the Collingwood train when they're playing, and just the banter that we have watching them. They're just so good. They really are, and they're only going to get better, because even when they lose a Steele Sidebottom, when they lose a Scott Pendlebury, all these young kids that they do actually have circulating through are going to go to the next gear. And it's a hard prospect to kind of swallow, given the fact that a lot of people are saying, Collingwood will eventually lose these players and they're going to drop off. But I definitely feel that some of these older players have a lot more to offer. I definitely feel Steele Sidebottom, he can play another year or two. I think Scott Pendlebury can play another year or two. Jamie Elliott getting older, but he can play another few years. It's going to be very interesting to see how Collingwood operate moving forward. But in the right now, very hard to see anybody beating them for the premiership. I think they're outright favourites quite comfortably. 3-2-1 for me, fall all the way of Collingwood players, kicking it off with the 1 vote. A player that we don't usually speak about all too much, but I think had the best game of the year, arguably probably the best game he has had since coming over to Collingwood from the Bulldogs, and that's Patrick Lipinski. He had 26 disposals, 14 kicks and 12 handballs, 9 marks, 5 tackles, 2 clearances, 404 metres gained, 2 goals and 10 score involvements. The 2 vote goes to Darcy Cameron. I feel, outside of conversation of Tristan Xerri being the All-Australian ruckman, I think Darcy Cameron was very stiff to not get a interchange position last year in last year's team. I definitely feel he's putting his hand up to potentially get a position like that this year. He has been flying under the radar, because when it comes to ruckman, I feel it's Xerri, I feel it's Gawn. This year it's been TDK. These type of players get spoken about all the time. Cameron doesn't get spoken about near enough, and I think it's a little bit disrespectful, but he had another big game for Collingwood. 19 disposals, 16 kicks and 3 handballs, 8 marks, 2 tackles, 28 hitouts, 6 clearances, 436 metres gained, 2 goals, and 8 score involvements. And best on ground, as I said, you don't announce all week that you're going to run a tag on a guy and then let him do the things that he did. Nick Dacos takes the 3 home. He had 30 disposals, 17 kicks and 13 handballs, 3 marks, 3 tackles, 5 clearances, 416 metres gained, 1 goal, and 9 score involvements. Again, Collingwood, very hard to be seen getting beaten for the premiership this year. St Kilda, very disappointing, probably given that they've got the list that they should be contesting for finals, and they have fallen off. They'll end up being a bottom 4 team, St Kilda. I made that prediction, I'm pretty sure, at the start of the year, and I'll stick by it. No Max King for the rest of the year. So forward of the ball, they're pretty boned. I don't know how they're going to go, but playing like this isn't going to get them fucking far, I can tell you what. Edge of your seat football at NG Stadium on Sunday afternoon, with GWS hosting the Gold Coast. This was a game that Gold Coast led for 3.5 quarters, and GWS came in late to steal the win, but it was still a game where if there was a couple more minutes left on the clock, I feel momentum was going to swing and Gold Coast were going to get it back. It was a 7-point win to GWS in a contest that was incredibly hard fought. It was a contest where Gold Coast players were abundant in all stats, and yet GWS found a way to counteract that and just get scores on the board. And it was in very much a lot of retrospects in the finish that we saw in calculations for game of the round, given the comeback and given the way GWS were able to dig deep. I don't know where this loss and where this win situates GWS and Gold Coast, because a lot of people are now saying if Gold Coast don't play finals this year, they have absolutely failed, and I agree with that. But GWS, if they miss the top 8, they have failed, because we spoke about Fremantle's list. GWS's list is arguably, let's be serious here, probably the best list in the competition. Forward, midfield, back. You've got all Australians in every single selection spot, so it's hard to it's a hard pill to swallow for GWS supporters, because they should be performing a hell of a lot better than what they have been. This should have been a game that Gold Coast had locked up, thrown away the key, and absolutely ran home with a win. But when you've got players like Jed Walters having a shot from 10 metres out and he sprays it, and you've got other players kicking out on the full and doing this and doing that, it was a game where opportunity was there for them, and they ruined it. They squandered it. And GWS were able to just pick up the pieces. Again, inaccuracy creeping in, costing another team a game. And this is two teams actively vying for a top 8 spot. Both of these positions in the top 8 are not up for grabs. They're not locked away. So, going to be very interesting to see how both of these teams perform moving forward. Can GWS find momentum from this? Can the Gold Coast bounce back? Don't know. But, scoreline speaks volumes. Quarter time, Gold Coast 7-6-48 led GWS 4-1-25. Half time, 8-8-56 led GWS 6-7-43. Three-quarter time, Gold Coast led 11-13-79 to GWS 8-9-57. And final term, Gold Coast 14-15-99 defeated by GWS 16-10-106. Breaking down the stats of the teams, it's comprehensive. Gold Coast had 56 more disposals collectively for the game. They had 2 more kicks. They dominated the handball game by well over 50. Inside 50s, they monstered GWS 68-44. Efficiency inside 50 though, GWS ran at 63%. The Gold Coast only ran at 44%. The Gold Coast led the free kick count quite comfortably as well, so a lot of people saying they were hard done by. 15-24 the way of free kicks. They monstered the hitouts by 26. Clearances they won. Contested ball they had more of. They had more uncontested ball. They turned the ball over less. They took less marks around the ground. Actually, GWS took 21 more marks around the ground collectively. Laid more tackles. They beat the tackle count by 25. Tackles inside 50. Gold Coast monstered that stat. And unfortunately, it just wasn't able to be done. It's almost like it was pinched from the palm of their hands late. Jake Stringer, coming into the game, kicking an absolutely sensational goal from the boundary line, was insane. The fact that they won this game without Lockie Whitfield in defence as well, because Lockie Whitfield went down hard, ended up failing his HIA assessment, so he will miss potentially the next game. I know GWS have the bye this coming weekend, but his next game falls on the 12th day, and I believe concussion protocols is you have to sit out 12 days. So I don't know whether, if a game falls on the 12th day, whether they can get an exemption for him to play, or whether because it's on the 12th and he needs to sit out 12, whether he will miss. But he was out early. GWS's defensive line still managed to stand up tall, and they ended up picking up a much-needed win. Great game of football, especially late. Just two teams throwing everything at it, knowing what was on the line. And as a neutral, one of my favourite games of the weekend. It was great to watch. With the votes for this game, it was hard for me to split, and I actually took players out. I threw players back in. The one player that is probably stiff to miss the votes in this game for Gold Coast would be Tuke Miller. I thought he was great, and for GWS, Toby Green was sensational as well. But these are the three I landed on. The one vote I am giving to Matt Rowell. He had 34 disposals, 12 kicks and 22 handballs, 8 tackles, 12 clearances, 407 metres gained, and 9 score involvements. The 2 vote I gave to Tom Green. I thought his ascendancy in the GWS midfield is what won GWS the game. He had 31 disposals, 13 kicks, 18 handballs, 4 marks, 9 tackles, 16 clearances, 427 metres gained, 1 goal, and 7 score involvements. And even though they lost, it was hard to go against Noah Anderson for best on ground here. He had 42 disposals, 13 kicks and 29 handballs, 3 marks, 3 tackles, 7 clearances, 651 metres gained, 2 goals, and 15 score involvements. He was in absolutely everything. As I said, I don't know where these teams go moving forward. Ideally, in a retrospect to team lists here, I think GWS go further. I don't know how Gold Coast run is on the way home, but I think if Gold Coast miss the mark here and don't play finals, there is going to be a lot of egg on the face of Damien Hardwick and his team. I don't see how they fall out though. Do they fall out of the top 8? Let me know. Let me know what you think. Comment section down below. The final game of the round broke my fucking heart. It was at Marvel Stadium, the Bulldogs hosting Richmond. I knew this was going to be a bloodbath, and it was. It was hard to watch. It was a game that I still watched until the final siren. I tell you, every weekend when Richmond is playing, I watch right until the final siren. Actually, with every game, I watch until the final siren most of the time. But yeah, this was a bitter pill to swallow. It was a great last term from Richmond, but I mean, probably junk change by that point in time because the Bulldogs led by such a big margin. But to only kick 3 goals in 3 quarters and then kick 5 in the last, I thought there was a little bit of light to take away from this. And as a Richmond supporter, I feel, and for retrospective, examples with North Melbourne, with West Coast, with Essendon even, if you could try to find light at the end of the tunnel in any way, shape or form, you take it. And there was still some shining light here. I think Richmond long-term are going to be fine. We had Taj Houghton debut in the VFL. He had played half a game of football, had 13 touches, laid a few tackles, a few score involvements. He was on fire. He looked good, so I'm hoping we get to see him because his explosiveness around the contest is going to be great to watch. A lot of people, especially Kane Cornes, throwing Noah Bolter under the rails this week. Hard for a player to find continuity when he has to sit out every second week, basically, due to this curfew. So I wouldn't at all be saying things like Richmond are going to be regretting signing him to a 7-year deal and all this bullshit Kane Cornes has said, because at the end of the day, Noah Bolter's best is still incredible. I still feel he will be, at one point in his career, an All-Australian defender. It's just a matter of him finding continuity and confidence back in his game, and it's hard for him to do so when he's been in the limelight, deservingly so. I mean, he did it to himself. But, next year, when the curfew's gone, he'll be fine. He'll play every round. He will be back to his normal best, and we'll be laughing at comments that Kane Cornes has made. Enough about Richmond, though, because unfortunately it was all the way of the doggies, and they look so good. But I digress. Conversation now comes from the fact that the only team that they have beaten within the top 8 configuration is GWS. They have only beaten teams that are underneath them. So can they be a premiership threat if they are losing to contending teams and only flat track bullying the teams underneath them? Great point to have in the comment section down below. I keep telling you, if you want to chat, let's have a chat. But the score line here, quite convincing. At quarter time, I actually had a little bit of hope because they only led by the 2 goals. 3-3-21 leading 1-3-9. I thought, yep, okay, we're in this. And then at halftime, it was 10-6, 66 to 1-4-10. We let them go on and kick 7 goals, and we only kicked the 1 behind. And then it was no different at 3-quarter time. 15-7, 97, leading 3-8, 26. And then the final score line, 21-9, 135, defeating Richmond 8-8, 56. Upsetting. Outcomes like this was to be expected this year by Richmond fans. A lot of people still, as I like to point out, said that Richmond wouldn't win a game this year. So it's not at all alarming to me that these type of losses happen because they were expected. It's not me accepting or being complacent with mediocrity at all. But, at the end of the day, with how we've lost all the players that we've lost and the rebuilding nature that we're going under, we're going to get smacked some weeks. And we need to be able to take the good with the bad. We need to ride out these losses to make sure when those wins come, they taste so much greater. When you look at the stats of this game, it's no surprise the Bulldogs absolutely dominant everywhere around the ground. They had over 100 more disposals. They had 60-odd more kicks. They had 40-odd more handballs. They had 21 more inside 50s. The hitouts was actually even, quite surprisingly. They won the clearances by 10. Contested possessions, they won. Uncontested possessions, they won. They actually they turned the ball over less. The marking game was insane. They beat us in marks 128-74. We laid more tackles. 56 tackles for the game is pretty good considering we averaged 53. Tackles inside 50 was pretty good as well. 1%ers we led, but obviously when the ball's in our end of the ground, 1%ers pretty much going to happen most of the time. But as comprehensive a win as the Bulldogs have had this year, this now means in the space of their last 6 or 7 outings, they've got 2 90-plus wins and a 70-point win under their belt. But again, to teams that are underneath them on the ladder. So how much stock can we put into that? I don't know. 3-2-1 all the way of the Bulldogs. Absolutely no fucking surprise here. The one vote I gave to Tim English. I thought he had a great game in the ruck. He was just popping up around the ground in spots that he had no right popping up in. And he got involved in a lot of the Bulldogs scores. He had 24 disposals, 15 kicks and 9 handballs, 9 marks, 1 tackle, 28 hit-outs, 6 clearances, 282 metres gained, 2 goals, and 11 score involvements. The 2 vote goes to Sam Darcy. There was a lot of talk about how many he would kick this week. The answer, ladies and gentlemen, was 5. He had 19 disposals, 11 kicks and 8 handballs, 8 marks, 1 tackle, 4 hit-outs, 2 clearances, 290 metres gained, 5 goals, and the 9 score involvements. And best on ground, no absolute surprise here. He wound back the clock quite severely. It was Mr. Marcus Bontempelli. He had 36 disposals, 18 kicks, 18 handballs, 3 marks, 2 tackles, 7 clearances, 716 metres gained, 3 goals, and 12 score involvements. Thank players like Nick Vlaston for still playing in this team. I'm gonna cry the day Nick Vlaston retires, because if he didn't play this game, this would have bled out much more. I'm trying to cling on to hope. Light at the end of the tunnel. Nick Vlaston still hangs around for a few more years. I think the drop-off will be more severe when we lose Nick Vlaston, when we lose Nathan Broad, when we lose Tom Lynch. Even though Tom Lynch didn't have much of an impact, he still makes a contest, and his leadership, obviously, to the younger kids is very, very well respected around the club as well. But there is potential for this rebuild to be stunted a little bit when these players drop off. I'm just glad that we're seeing young kids get opportunity, and young kids taking advantage of opportunity as well. At the end of the day, got to be happy with that. With all of round 15 out of the way, there is 2 things for us to do to wrap the round up. The first of which is now collectively looking at all of the votes heading in after 15 rounds of football and seeing how the top 5 is situated for the 2025 season. And for the first time this year, our top 5 are all individually in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 slots. We don't have any double ups. So, in 5th place on 20 votes, we have Fremantle's Caleb Sarong. In 4th place on 21 votes, we have Gold Coast's Noah Anderson. In 3rd place on 22 votes, we have Geelong's Bailey Smith. In 2nd place on 23 votes, we have Adelaide's Jordan Dawson. And in 1st place on 24 votes, we have Collingwood's Nick Dacos. And now that we have gotten the individual performances out of the way, we can now look at the collective by turning attention to the AFL ladder. This is how we are situated after 15 rounds of football, ladies and gentlemen. In 1st place on 48 points, we have Collingwood. In 2nd place on 42 points, we have Brisbane. Just behind them on 40 points, we have Geelong in 3rd. And then we've got a couple that start to tie up. And this is where wins and losses are going to be very critical to how teams finish this year. In 4th place, we have Adelaide. In 5th place, we have Hawthorn. In 6th place, we have Fremantle. And in 7th place, we have GWS. All of those teams collectively on 36 points. We then have the Bulldogs, who have moved into the top 8. We have the Gold Coast in 9th, both of which are on 32 points, split by percentage. Carlton sitting in 10th, Sydney sitting in 11th, Port Adelaide sitting in 12th, and Essendon sitting in 13th, all equally tied on 24 points. Melbourne, 14th, St Kilda, 15th, both on 20 points. North Melbourne's in at 16th on 18th points. 18th points? Holy shit. We have Richmond in 17th on 12 points, and then we have West Coast dead last, 18th on 4 points. I think collectively looking at this ladder here, as I stumble across my words, I feel the Gold Coast is still in the hunt outside of the 8. I feel Sydney can make a late charge, and Port Adelaide, maybe. I'm putting a line through Carlton, officially. And I think the teams that need to start performing, obviously the Bulldogs need to lift their game, GWS and Fremantle. I think those are the three teams at risk if they lose some continuity in their game. But Adelaide even still sitting in 4th, given the fact that they're so close in points to teams around them. A team like Adelaide and Hawthorn, if they lose 1 or 2, they drop out of the 8. It's an open field for all teams underneath Geelong, Brisbane and Collingwood. I feel those 3 are locked in. I did make a ballsy call about a month ago saying my top 4 was going to be Collingwood, Brisbane, Geelong and Adelaide. I don't know whether Adelaide are going to make the top 4 now, but Geelong, Brisbane, Collingwood, lock them in. I still think Collingwood is the standard bearer. And on the flip side of things, Richmond was in calculation at $1,001 for the premiership, but has now been taken off the ranks. We play Adelaide this week, so Adelaide might actually go on and lock in that top 4. I'm a little bit concerned. There is only one thing left to wrap up this video and to recap the round officially, and that is to announce my team of the week. Some of these players have bounced in and out, in and out, in and out, and I think I've landed on the correct ones here. Some players missing out only just marginally due to other players outperforming. And this is why conversation points can be had about, you know, picking a team of the week, giving out votes for best on ground. I would love to hear your feedback in the comment section down below. Let me know if I'm doing it right. I am considering throwing my team of the weeks up on social media just to see how they go, but I think people will tear me limb from limb. I really do, because, you know, that's what social media is all about. Social media just wants to get on my back and tear me down, ladies and gentlemen. But this is my team of the week for round 15. Across our back line, I have Callum Mills and Harry Sheasel in the back pockets, with Toby Pink at full back. Halfback sees Dane Zorko and Jordan Clark on the halfback flanks, and Luke Ryan at centre halfback. Across the midfield, I've got Josh Dunkley and Tom Powell on the wings, with Noah Anderson in the centre. Our forward line sees Toby Green and Isaac Heaney across the half-forward flanks, with Sam Darcy at centre-half forward. Deep forward, we have Mitch McGovern and Logan Morris in the forward pockets, and Darcy Cameron at full forward. Luke Jackson is this week's ruck, Marcus Bontempelli is the ruck rover, and Caleb Daniel is ruck rover. Our interchange sees Tim English, Nick Dacos, Matt Rowell, and Tom Green. The sub this week is Patrick Lipinski, and the coach of the round is Chris Fagan for Brisbane picking up a much-needed win against premiership favourites in Geelong. Yes, I know I've got 3 ruckmen in the team, and yes, I am aware that Darcy Cameron is not a full forward, but I mean, he kicked 2 goals and he played a decent forward half game, and I thought he was deserving in the team, so hey, I'll throw him whatever the fuck I want. If I want him for full forward, he's going in full forward. That is it, ladies and gentlemen. The round is officially recapped. Thank you for joining me for another video. I do hope you guys enjoy the content I throw out into the universe, and if you do, I would appreciate it if you hit that like button down below. If you're new around here and you want to get on board the community we are building, feel free to hit that subscribe button. I appreciate everybody that has done so far, and continue to appreciate everybody that gets on board from this point in time. Plenty of discussion points to have out of this past week of football, as well as if you have any suggestions for content you would like to see on this channel, let me know in the comment section down below. I'm cooking some things up right now, some mid-year All-Australian things, and talking about individual players, individual teams, giving them pass marks and everything else. But if you've got suggestions, let me know. That is it from me, guys. I'm out of here, and as always, I will catch you guys next time.